Welcome into the Cardinals Insider Podcast, June 2024 edition. We're going to have a bit of a Rickwood theme here this month. If you're listening to it before June the 20th, we're yet to play at Rickwood Field. If it's afterward, then that game has already happened. And who better to talk about all things Negro Leagues than the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, Bob Kendrick. I had the chance to go to Kansas City and talk with him earlier in this baseball season, so we'll play that in just a moment. But right now, joining me, as always, Larry State, our manager of alumni relations. Joe Pfeiffer is on assignment. Larry, this was a really fun interview. Bob is just an amazing, articulate speaker and a great keeper of the story. There were so many tidbits. Did you have a favorite one?
Well, I did. And like you said, watching that interview that you did with him, it was fantastic. He could maybe serve as a CEO for a day of any company that wanted to make a dynamic presentation about something, regardless of what it is. And his passion for baseball history and the history of the Negro Leagues just comes out in that interview. And when you talk about a tidbit, we have had the privilege of getting to know some of our players, many of who have passed away, sadly, but players such as Bob Gibson and Lou Brock. And in your interview with him, of course, Bob Kendrick mentioned Lou Brock, saying that when he came to the Cardinals, he met Cool Papa Bell, of course, one of the great players in baseball history and in Negro Leagues baseball history as well. And what I loved was the tidbit about Lou saying that Cool Papa Bell, when he met Lou, had tips for him, talked baseball with him, and when Lou said, some of these things that you're telling me, I didn't see them in the book. And Cool Papa Bell said, that's because they're not in the book. That was from one legendary fast baseball player to one of the greatest base stealers of all time. That was good to hear, and I don't know that this is one of those things they discussed, but in the time we got to spend with some of those players like Lou, one day talking baseball, I remember Lou telling me that when he would get on first base, and he was known as fast, but also one of the smartest base stealers, one of the things he would do, standing over at first, is look at the pattern of wear on the pitcher's shoes who was on the mound, and that could tell him something about the pitcher's motion that he would use to his advantage. He could tell even earlier if the pitcher was going to throw over to first or was coming home, based on what he saw in those shoes and then watching the pitcher's motion, and that gave him an edge stealing bases. That could have been that kind of information, that wisdom that was passed down from one player to another.
Yep, James Cool Papa Bell, one of the great players in Negro League history, baseball history. We're going to hear a lot about Negro League baseball in St. Louis in this interview. We'll hear some about the historic Rickwood Field, some of the great players that played for the Stars here in St. Louis, and Cool Papa Bell is certainly at the head of that list. Only two players that have a statue outside that are not Cardinals red jacket guys. I'm sure you know Cool Papa Bell and then George
Mr. Sisler,
yes, who was of course the first American League MVP, hit 400 twice for the old American League Browns. So lots of history. That was the thing I took out of this, Larry, was just there is so much history of the Negro Leagues that even for hardcore baseball fans and nerds like me, standing in what they call their field of legends there, which is where we did the interview. If you're with us on YouTube, you're about to see it. You just get a sense of how awesome the accomplishments were of these players, how passionate the fan bases were, and how we almost certainly missed guys that would have been thought of in the same breath with Musial and Williams and Ruth and Gehrig. And unfortunately, because of the ugliness of racism and what was going on in the early part of the history of our country, they didn't get the chance to play in the major leagues. And that has always been something I've known, but really has sat heavy with me in the last couple weeks as we've put this content together.
Well, and you know that is not ancient history, too.
Yeah,
that there
it's
are
very recent, really.
People alive today who have lived through that still. It's sometimes harder to imagine until you listen to some of the people like Bob Kendrick in your interview and hear the stories those players have told. And with that statue of Cool Papa Bell outside Busch Stadium, I think that is a great thing that our team's ownership and the Cardinals organization, recognizing all of baseball history in St. Louis in that way and showing the respect that was deserved for the Negro Leagues and for players like Cool Papa Bill.
There's no doubt. A lot of Cardinal history, but history of the game in St. Louis goes far beyond the Cardinals, even here in this area. Let's get right to it. Bob Kendrick sitting down to talk about Rickwood Field, the St. Louis Stars, and all things having to do with integration and the Negro Leagues here on the Cardinals Insider Podcast. Rickwood Field this summer. A lot of Cardinal fans maybe not terribly familiar with Rickwood, but there's a huge history there. Paint the picture for us of the ballpark itself and kind of the character that it is.
Well, I'll never forget the first time that I walked onto the field at Rickwood. I take that back. I walked on the property at Rickwood. It gave me chills. So this is before I actually get out on the field. And as a steward of the story, it only makes sense because there aren't very many ballparks left that really call the Negro Leagues home. Rickwood is one of those, along with Hincliffe Stadium in Paterson, New Jersey, League Park in Cleveland, and Hamtramck in Detroit. So there are not many of these venues still left, and each time that I've been to one of them, I get that same feeling. Well, Rickwood, for those who don't know, is the oldest active professional baseball park in the country. So it is older than Fenway and Wrigley. And so much history has been made at that ballpark. And none of that history is greater than the history that has been made by the old Birmingham Black Barons who called Rickwood Field home for so many years, and the legendary Negro League Stars who came in to compete against the Barons and the litany of great players that the Barons had themselves. And so that place is really, really special. And so when you walk there on the property and especially on the field, you feel the ghost of those legendary stars, their spirits. You feel that when you walk into that place. And so come June 20th, it is going to be very special. I'm sure somewhat emotional, because it will be I believe, a seminal moment for Negro Leagues history. The nation, and really the baseball world, will be focused on this game, and will be some introduced to the history of the Negro Leagues. Others, I think this will enhance their understanding of the Negro Leagues, but this will be a major happening come June 20th there in Birmingham.
There's been a long now effort to kind of right some of the injustices that can be righted, putting Negro Leaguers into the Cooperstown Hall of Fame, Major League Baseball designating the Negro Leagues as a major league. Does this kind of feel, you said seminal moment, does this feel like maybe the culmination of all that, trying to bring those guys, not that they weren't before, but make sure people know that those legacies are right on par with the major leaguers they knew? Yeah,
it's all part of, I think, a continuum. What we've seen is this tremendous interest in Negro Leagues history. We certainly believe and hope that this museum has played a tremendous role in elevating that awareness that has led us down this path to some of those things that you highlighted, the recognition of the Negro Leagues as a major league, which took place, the announcement was in December of 2020, right in the midst of COVID. This was one of the things that, for baseball fans, really made them pay attention, I think, even more so to the Negro Leagues when Commissioner Manfred made that historic announcement. And you're right. I've always understood that the Negro Leagues were a major league, but that historical validation is tremendously significant in the eyes of those who are not as close to this history as we are here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and now eventually the rolling of the statistics into the annals of Major League Baseball history. This ultimately leads us down this pathway to this game. I guess you could call it a Field of Dreams-like game that had been taking place over in Dyersville, Iowa for the last couple of years, which really captured the hearts and the imaginations of baseball fans worldwide. But as I remind folks, the Field of Dreams, in all of its glory, That was a movie. It was R-E-E-L. Rickwood Field, and this salute to the Negro Leagues, that is R-E-A-L. It is very real. And I was just thrilled at the number of baseball fans after the games took place there in Dyersville who reached out, and they were hoping that Major League Baseball would do something similar in honor of the Negro Leagues. And baseball listened. And they've come up with this grand event that will be this Rickwood Classic, this Rickwood salute to the Negro Leagues. And it's going to be tremendously special. So all these things, I believe, kind of dovetail together, and it has led us to this point where you see the Negro Leagues now in the video game, MLB The Show. And that is one of the biggest things to ever happen to the Negro Leagues in terms of its recognition, particularly with a generation of young people who, if it wasn't for that gaming platform, they might not ever even thought about the Negro Leagues. And now they're not only thinking about the Negro Leagues, they are embracing these players as they are part of the video game, and they are falling in love with the stories of the Negro Leagues. But then again, what's not to love about the story of the Negro Leagues? It embodies the American spirit in such a rich way that I can't imagine people not loving this story. The problem was they just simply didn't know the story of the Negro Leagues. And as my late mother would say, you don't know what you don't know. And that's why this museum is so vitally important, because it is incumbent upon us to make sure we're doing the things to create that level of outreach that captures now the imagination of young folks, and we're going to them where they are. I'm not just sitting back waiting for them and hoping that they might walk through these turnstiles to come here. I went out and reached them where they are. And I think there's been this misnomer that the young fan, young baseball fan, young gamer in this case, young people in general didn't care about history. And it's just that, a misnomer. They do care. But it is incumbent upon how history is presented to them. It can't be history just for history's sake. And so we found innovative ways to reach them, whether it's through an animation series that we did with Major League Baseball called Undeniable, or through this epic video game, MLB The Show. So we debuted them in 23. We've added additional players in 24. And we have a multi-year partnership, 5-year total partnership with Sony PlayStation for the inclusion of Negro Leagues. But Brett, when you stop to think about it, if anyone should be in a video game, it should be the players from the Negro Leagues, because they played the game, I guess you could say video game-esque. The way that they played the game, the style, the flair, the flavor that they brought to the game. And let me tell you, it is resonating with those young people, the swagger of Satchel Paige and all these almost mythical-like stars. But it's not mythical. It's not a myth. They were very real. And so we're excited about all these things.
What did it mean to black communities throughout America to have ballparks and teams that were their own? Specifically Birmingham, known for being the most segregated city in America before Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement. What did it mean to the black community to have Rickwood as a rallying point?
And not just Rickwood, but these stadiums that played home to Negro League games across this country, it was a tremendous source of pride because it was inherently ours. Now, was it shared with others? Absolutely. And really, outside of the Deep South, at Negro League games, we were sitting side by side watching what many would say the best baseball being played in this country, without question the most entertaining brand of baseball that was being played in this country. Now, in the Deep South, there was not going to be any commingling. But here's the kicker. The Birmingham Black Barons were outdrawing the Birmingham Barons in their own ballpark. And the coverage that was generated there, which is kind of rare to some extent, the mainstream coverage of the Birmingham Black Barons was actually pretty significant in comparison to the way other mainstream cities looked at the Negro Leagues. Very little coverage of the Negro Leagues, by and large, but it was a little bit different in Birmingham, even as segregated as that city was, but it was a rallying point for the African American community. It was a place that we could go, and we supported it tremendously. And as I remind people, you went to see and you went to be seen. And so Negro League games there was nothing recreational about it. It was the social event of the week, and it was tremendously supported all across this country, where you had successful black baseball, you had thriving black economies to go along with it, and of course there in Birmingham, those black barons were as beloved as anyone, and rightfully so, because they always had really good baseball teams there in Birmingham.
Sadly, the number of alumni from the Negro Leagues is dwindling, but for those gentlemen that are still alive, that know this game is coming, what has it been like when you talk with them? What have they said about the excitement around it?
They're super excited. And not to be over romantic, but I think it's true. This game may add several years to their lives. Because if you saw the video of a guy who's from St. Louis, the great Ryan Howard, our dear friend, if you saw that video where he personally hand-delivered invitations to a number of Negro League players to attend that game, and you could feel the joy through the video screen. You could absolutely feel it. It does wonders for them that they are being recognized in the way that they are being recognized. And it just takes me back to the early 1990s, 1993, when I got involved with this museum and met the founder of this museum and Hall of Famer himself, the late great Buck O'Neill. Met him for the very first time in 1993, and one of the first questions that I posed to him at that time was, Buck, what motivated you to want to build a Negro Leagues Baseball Museum? And his answer was succinct, but also very poignant, so that we would be remembered. He did not want them to be forgotten for not just what they gave the game of baseball, but more importantly, what they gave this country. And you're right, this is at a time when there's only a handful of those legendary athletes still with us. I liken them to being like World War II vets. And of course, many of them were World War II vets. And of course, what stood at risk was that this story was going to die when that last Negro Leaguer left the face of this earth. And as I remind our guests who walk through this museum every single day, we cannot allow that to happen. It makes this museum that much more important. And we knew from the onset that when we started this project in 1990, that it was literally going to be a race against time. This wasn't a matter of if these players were going to leave us. It became a matter of when they were going to leave us. And every time we lose one of them, that window of opportunity closes just a little bit more. Their legacy should not die. And it plays on here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. But while we still have them in our midst, we should embrace them. We should celebrate them. And that's why I tip my cap to Major League Baseball, Major League Baseball's Players Association, all who are involved in making this game happen. We're thrilled that we are a partner in this venture, had a seat at the table in the planning process, and God willing, I'll be there in Birmingham for this event. And like I said, I'm sure it will be tremendously emotional for those players, for their families, and for all of us who are stewards of this story. So it's very exciting.
St. Louis has a tremendous baseball history in general, but fans might not be as familiar with the St. Louis Stars. Yes. What sets them apart, maybe even, or makes them unique, I suppose, from other Negro Leagues franchises that St. Louisans should know?
Well, St. Louis has tremendous black baseball history, first and foremost. They had one of the original 8 Negro League franchises when Rube Foster established the Negro National League in a meeting that was held right around the corner from where we are now, the old Paseo YMCA. The building still stands. We're in the process of saving that historic landmark, and it will ultimately convert it into the Buckle-Neal Education and Research Center and expand our operations into the very building that gave birth to the story that we're now charged with preserving. Well, the St. Louis Giants were one of those original 8 franchises that made up the inaugural Negro National League. The Giants would then morph into the better known St. Louis Stars. And the St. Louis Stars, well, as the name would imply, had a lot of star power. They had some of the biggest stars to ever play in the Negro Leagues, and I always delight when you start to talk about guys like Mule Suttles. Mule Suttles is in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, and this falls into the category of you can't make this stuff up. Folks, he swung a 50-ounce bat. Yes, 50 ounce, that's a treat. And when Mule would come to the plate, fans would start chanting, kick Mule, because they wanted to see him hit that thing out the ballpark. The power, as you could well imagine, was tremendous, but he also had a lifetime batting average of over 300 and is in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And then there's El Diablo, the devil, Willie James Wells, who I tell people was Ozzie Smith before we ever knew who the Wizard was. Willie Wells was making those same kinds of acrobatic defensive plays that captivated the hearts and imaginations of St. Louis Cardinal fans and baseball fans as well, the way the Wizard was doing that kind of stuff there at Busch Stadium. Willie Wells was doing that same thing at Stars Park and other places across the country. But here's the kicker. Willie Wells was a power-hitting shortstop. And even the Wizard had to take notice of that when I had him for a conversation on my Black Diamonds podcast where we talked about Willie Wells and how tremendous Willie Wells would be the inventor of the batting helmet. Yeah, Willie Wells was notorious for getting beamed because he was going to crowd the plate and he played a very tough tumble style of play. Willie Wells would fight you in a heartbeat. So he got hit quite a bit. And a notorious spitball pitcher named Bill Bird beamed him in a playoff game, basically knocked him unconscious. The medical folks are saying, you can't play. Yeah, you clearly don't know Willie Wells. There was no way you were going to keep Willie Wells out the lineup. The very next day, Willie Wells comes back with a construction helmet and is taped over his head, and that was the advent of the batting helmet. Yeah, Willie James Wells, El Diablo as he was known in Mexico because he could dig it out the dirt. And of course, the name that resonates with so many baseball fans. That doesn't always resonate when I say James Thomas Bell. People say, who? But oh, you say Cool Papa, and everybody knows, if you're a baseball fan, who you're talking about. James Thomas Cool Papa Bell lived and died in St. Louis. He is still believed to be the fastest man to ever play this game. They clocked him in an astounding 12 seconds, circling the bases from home to home. His good friend Satchel Paige would say of Cool that he was so fast he could walk in a room, turn off the lights, get in bed, pull up the covers before the room went dark. But as I oftentimes tell my guests, you don't have to fictionalize the speed of Cool Papa Bell. Cool Papa Bell once stole 175 bases in a less than 200 game season. He twice, honest to God's truth, twice scored from first base on a bunt in exhibition games against Major League All-Stars. See, plays like the bunt and run, hit and run, essentially created and perfected in the Negro Leagues, later picked up by Major League Baseball. And of course, Cool Papa comes to the St. Louis Stars. He's 19 years old. And he's a pitcher when he comes to the Stars. And the story has it that he's in a tight situation facing the legendary Oscar Charleston, who's in center field. who coincidentally had one of the greatest seasons in baseball history while a member of the St. Louis Stars. In 1921, Oscar Charleston led the Negro Leagues in home runs, triples, doubles, stolen bases, and batting average in the same season. Well, Cool is facing Charleston in a tight, jam, bases-loaded situation, and young Cool Papa Bell gets him out. And the Stars manager says, "Oh man, that's one Cool Papa." And the name stuck. As fate would have it, he hurt his arm, which might have been the best thing that ever happened, because now he moves away from pitching and he goes to the outfield, where that blazing speed ran down everything that was hit out there, and he learned to switch hit, and so now he moves over to the left side, and as the players in the Negro League say, if he bunted it and it bounced twice, put it in your pocket. You had no chance to get him. Yeah, so St. Louis has known great baseball through its Cardinal history, even through its St. Louis Browns history, even though the Browns were not nearly recognized to the level of the St. Louis Cardinals. But that dude over our shoulder, Satchel Paige, made 2 All-Star appearances while playing for the Browns. And honestly, we don't know how old he was. He was either 46 or 56 when he gets to the Browns. Who knows? It still remains an age-old mystery of just how old Satchel was. And of course, the St. Louis Stars should not be forgotten. They were one of the few Negro League teams that eventually had his own ballpark, Stars Park, which would have been over near Harris Stowe College, today. And so St. Louis's black baseball history is tremendously significant.
I've heard there was a short porch, and they actually had to make a rule that home runs weren't home runs. Is that fact or fiction?
Well, I don't know of them calling the home run back, because there are a lot of places that had short porches. That short porch in right field in Yankee Stadium gave up a lot of home runs. And so now that one, I don't know if that is fact or fiction. It makes for a great story, but I can't imagine them not calling a home run a home run.
I read there was a short period where they were calling them ground rule doubles because they hit so many of them that if you hit it out right field on the fly, you only got second base, and then they stepped in. There was a short porch at Sportsman's Park too, so I guess that was a St. Louis thing back in the day. To have obviously black fans at Negro League games is something everyone would expect, but I've seen there were a lot of the time there were white folks that would come too, and we just don't think about that through the course of history. What brought both sides of society together in a time that was so fraught in every other arena of life?
I think that's the beauty of sports in general. They have united us in ways in which very few things have. I would say sports and music have been the 2 central things that have pulled us together universally. Baseball fans appreciate great athletes. I don't care what color you are. It was those who really weren't baseball fans who went specifically to hate on Jackie Robinson and the other early Negro Leaguers who transitioned into Major League Baseball. There was kind of this rule, I guess you could say, of not allowing the commingling of the races. Even though Jim Crow had reared its ugly head and people were kind of adhering to this notion that the 2 races just simply were not supposed to do anything together. But somehow baseball kind of moved beyond that. And you look at some of the images of photographs that we have, and you see so many white fans who were at those games, particularly as we move into the 40s during World War II. You see, a number of Negro League stars got called into service, and they served valiantly. But the superstars of the Negro Leagues were a little too old, and they didn't get called. Yeah, so you still had the Cool Papa Bells, the Satchel Paiges, the Josh Gibsons of the world still playing at that time. And so these white fans had heard about their reputations. Their reputations had preceded them. They knew that they were playing great baseball, and there was a natural curiosity to want to go see it. I still get folks who come through this museum and they'll talk about, well, my granddaddy went to see the Monarchs play. You know, my granddaddy saw the Homestead Grays play when they came through our town and this and that, and they are delighting at those remembrances. You know, that's what I admire about this story. Here's a league born out of segregation that will become the driving force for social change in this country. At Major League games, we were separated by chicken wire, which is why we have symbolically the chicken wire backstop. Because at Major League games, if they allowed blacks into the ballpark, that's how we were separated. So black fans would typically sit down the right or left field lines, and then we would be separated from white fans who sat in the rest of the ballpark. So now we use that same chicken wire to separate all of our guests from the centerpiece of our exhibition where we're taping this interview, which is called the Field of Legends. But at Negro League games, we were sitting side by side, watching again what many would say the best baseball being played in this country, and without question, the most entertaining brand of baseball that was being played. And so people wanted to see this. And I think because you started to see this influx of white fans, it also started to build this sentiment of integrating this game. It made no sense. And then you throw in the factor of World War II, and you had young black soldiers dying, fighting the exact same racism in another country that you were being asked to accept at home, and the groundswell of sentiment started to build in such a way that if they can die fighting for their country, why can't they play baseball in this country? And I think that gave Branch Rickey, pun intended, the ammunition to go out and make the move to try and bring Jackie Robinson into Major League Baseball. That ultimately opens the door for other black and brown athletes to transition into Major League Baseball, but it also kills the Negro Leagues. It put the Negro Leagues out of business.
You mentioned the brand, the style of baseball. How was what fans in St. Louis would have seen in Midtown and Mill Creek Valley at Stars Park different than what they would have seen in North City at Sportsman's Park at a Major League game?
And nothing against the way the Major Leagues played. Matter of fact, they play a similar game to which they play today, where they were a base-to-base kind of game. Now we're seeing the running game start to come back a little bit now with some of the rule changes. But essentially, Major League Baseball played a base-to-base kind of game. So a guy got on base, you moved him over to second, and the big hitters came in and drove him in. Nothing wrong with that. But the Negro Leagues, they would bunt that ball. They would get on first any way they could. They were going to steal second, they'd steal third, and man, if you weren't too smart, they were stealing home. So the pace of the game was far more fast. It was far faster. It was daring. It was aggressive. It had you sitting on the edge of your seat waiting to see what was going to happen. Or as my friend, the late great Buck O'Neill would say, you couldn't go to the concession stand because you might miss something that you never seen before. They just played the game differently. And I do believe that the Negro Leagues embraced the understanding that this was entertainment. It was entertainment at its finest. And because it was entertainment, doesn't mean that you weren't going to see great fundamentally sound baseball. But when you put great fundamentals combined with great athleticism, oh man, you get something special. And those Negro League players put on a show. Now, the major leaguers oftentimes frowned at that style of play. You know, Buck O'Neill would say, well, they would accuse us of showboating. Well, as my friend Buck O'Neill would say, number one, if you've got something to show, show it. Yeah, don't be afraid to show it. Number two, it's only showboating when you can't do it. Yeah, a guy dives in the hole, flips it behind his back, starts to double play. Well, today, that's a SportsCenter top 10 highlight every day of the week. But the major leaguers would look at those Negro League players and saying they were showboating, that they didn't play the game the right way, which I really believe was a code word for saying they didn't play the game the white way. No, they had their own style of play, and it drew both black and white fans who came to see that style of play. And I think they were really enjoying what they saw in the Negro Leagues at a level that exceeded what they were seeing in the major leagues.
Talked about a couple of names for those Stars teams. I want to circle back to them. First of all, Cool Papa, the myth, the legend about getting into bed like you spoke about. That was kind of a true story.
It's a true story.
Right?
No, it's a true story. Yeah, it's a true story. Cool Papa and Satchel were dear friends and great teammates on a number of teams. And on this particular instance, they were traveling, and when they traveled, they were roommates. And so on this occasion, old Cool gets to the hotel room before Satchel does. He walks in the hotel room, flips the light switch on. There's a delay before the light comes on. Flip that light switch off. There's a delay before the light goes off. Old Cool says, uh-huh. When Satchel gets to the room, Cool is waiting on him. Satchel gets in bed, Cool hops up. Roomie, I'm so fast, I can flip this light switch off, run over, hop in bed, cover up before the room goes dark. And Satchel's like, Cool, you fast, but you ain't that fast. And Cool Papa Bell bet his meal money. And old Satchel took the bait. And in one of the greatest sports pranks of all time, because that light had a shortage in it, Cool was indeed able to flip that light switch off, run over, hop in bed, cover up before the room went dark. Satchel was so outdone that he just always told folks that Cool was that fast.
Cool Papa never played for the Cardinals, but there is a direct line to the organization through Lou Brock.
Absolutely.
How did they get to know each other? What was that relationship like?
Well, there's a reason that there's a statue of Cool Papa Bell at the ballpark there in St. Louis. And Lou told me when he got traded over to St. Louis from the Cubs, and of course Buck O'Neil signed the great Lou Brock to the Cubs. And Buck O'Neil was the last guy to sign off on the trade, one of the most infamous trades in baseball history, where they send Lou Brock over for a pitcher by the name of Ernie Broglio. And Mr. Broglio had won 20 games, had been a previous 20-game winner, but he was damaged goods. And the Cubs come to Buck because they knew that Lou was his guy. And they said, well, Buck, we have a chance to get Ernie Broglio. And we're going to trade Lou to St. Louis. What do you think? Buck, being the good company man that he was, said, no, we need pitching. But he also said that he knew that this move to St. Louis would give Lou an opportunity to play every day. In Chicago, he was having some challenges with that Sun outfield, and there was a lot of outfield competition. So he wasn't getting to play regularly. And Buck said he knew that this would be his opportunity, and so Buck said he signed off on the deal. The Cubs were just going to him as a courtesy. They trade Lou to St. Louis, and of course, we never hear of Mr. Broglio again until we talk about bad trades. Lou hits the ground literally running when he gets to St. Louis, throws the Cardinals into instant pennant contention there, and he says when he lands in Chicago, when he lands in St. Louis, one of the first people to reach out to him was Cool Papa Bell. Now, as Lou would say, I knew who Cool Papa Bell was. I had no idea that Cool Papa Bell knew who I was. And Cool Papa called him and he said he wanted to meet with him. And the two of them get together. And he says, Cool Papa starts telling him some things about base stealing and base running that he had never heard before. He said, Cool Papa, I don't remember seeing this in the book. He said, Cool Papa said, because it ain't in the book. And it created a relationship that lasted until Cool Papa Bell passed away there in St. Louis. And I think it meant the world to a young budding star by the name of Lou Brock, that this legend, Cool Papa Bell, would essentially take him under his wing. And I think it instilled so much confidence. You know, Lou was a great baseball player. He had all the tools to be a great baseball player, but this game can be difficult, and he had some struggles early on, And here's cool Papa Bell saying, oh, you can do this, and let me help you with this. And Lou's career blossomed into a Hall of Fame career. And it was only fitting that when Lou set the stolen base, all-time single-season stolen base record, who was there to meet him? Cool Papa Bell. And if you recall, they pulled the bag out the ground, they've got the ceremony, and Cool Papa has the bag in his hand, and they eventually give the microphone to Cool Papa, and he looks at Lou, he says, Lou, we're gonna give you this base, because if we don't give it to you, you're gonna steal it anyway. And it's one of the moments, and I had the opportunity, humble opportunity, to speak at Lou Brock's funeral services. He was that close to the museum, and I will forever be indebted to his widow, Jackie Brock, for extending an invitation for me to come to St. Louis to speak at Lou's funeral services. And I shared that story, and of course, even as sad as his passing was, that certainly elicited some laughs, because we were there to celebrate Lou's life. But it's always difficult to lose someone that you love. And if you didn't know Buck O'Neil, but you knew Lou Brock, you knew Buck O'Neil. Yeah, Lou was Buck's surrogate son, along with Ernie Banks. And so that connection, that great St. Louis connection between Lou Brock and Cool Papa Bell is really meaningful and significant.
Talked about Mule Suttles, that big bat, the power. He was not the only power hitter in the Negro Leagues, but how did maybe being a little different in that was a big part of his game, how did that give him a celebrity? Did these guys have celebrity the way we think about it attached to ball players?
Big time, big time. Now, more times than not, they were celebrities in their communities. And so the black press was telling everybody about the feats of the great players. The African-American paper there in St. Louis was letting you know what was happening with Mule Suttles and Willie Wells and Cool Papa Bell when they were members of the St. Louis Stars, and what the Stars were doing in general. They were heroes in their communities. The kids idolized them. Everybody wanted to be like them. As Buck O'Neil would say, when they went to the restaurant, they were going to get the best service. They were going to get the best table. It was just in their community. Because of segregation, outside of their community, things were always different. You didn't know where you could get a meal. You didn't know if you could stop somewhere and have a place that you could sleep. And so the bus became your sanctuary. But within their community, where you are today, historic 18th and Vine, these guys were huge stars. The kids were hanging from their garments. You wanted to be there, and you had access to them. Because it didn't matter how big a star they were going to live in the same neighborhood that I did, because that's what segregation did. And so not only did I idolize them for their tremendous athletic capabilities, I idolized them because I saw them every day operate as men. And I wanted to mimic that behavior. And so while segregation was a horrible chapter in this country's history, segregation forced African Americans to have their own. The Negro Leagues was part of that ownership. The segregated, mandated black businesses that were really blossoming, due in large part because Negro Leagues baseball was bringing them a built-in clientele that led those businesses to their economic heights. I oftentimes remind folks who come here to this museum that the Negro Leagues is a fascinatingly complicated story, because what integration did, integration of baseball in particular, spawned integration in a much broader spectrum. But it killed the Negro Leagues, and when it killed the Negro Leagues, it killed that catalyst that sparked economic development in so many urban communities across this country. To a greatest extent, black economy really never recovered from losing the Negro Leagues. So as I remind my guests, what was good morally and socially with the integration of our game was devastating economically. And so you could say that the Negro Leagues essentially took one for the team.
El Diablo, Willie Wells. He went by that nickname. He also went by Wee Willie Wells.
Yes.
Why was he called Wee Willie Wells?
He wasn't a big guy. He's probably 5'8", 5'9", and so he doesn't fit the mold of a power hitter, but he was. And not the gun at shortstop, but such a quick release. He got rid of that thing in a hurry, and surprisingly powerful for a guy his size. And Willie Wells was essentially a 5'2" shortstop. Don't see that often. Yeah, he could do everything that you could do defensively, but he's also going to hit for power. He's going to drive in runs. And when you hear guys like Cool Papa Bell talk about Willie Wells, they talk about him with tremendous fondness, how great he was, particularly as a shortstop. And St. Louis got a chance to witness that.
The last name, and not a St. Louis Cardinal, but someone that'll be celebrated in and around Rickwood Field, is Willie Mays.
Yes.
What did Willie mean to the history of the Negro Leagues and that branch to the major leagues? Because Jackie was the first, but kind of to heal the wounds, so to speak, he couldn't be the last. There had to be Henry Aaron, there had to be Willie Mays.
Yeah. Well, the transitional aspect of what Jackie opens up makes us wonder about what if. Because one of the interesting factoids that I find so fascinating about the Negro Leagues, from 1949 through 1959, 9 of 11 National League MVPs were former Negro League stars. Now, we're not talking about rookies of the year. We're talking about MVPs. Were former Negro League stars, which tells you the immediate impact, or should give you an indication about the immediate impact that these players had as they transitioned and followed Jackie Robinson. But what I remind folks is they didn't learn how to play baseball after 1947. They were playing great baseball well before 1947. And it's not far-fetched that there might have been some ball players certainly just as good, some might argue even better than Willie Mays and Henry Aaron. That is hard to fathom, that there were ball players better than Willie Mays and Henry Aaron. But if it's 20 years later, let's just say integration doesn't occur in 1947, and it's 10, 15, 20 years later, think about the stars we would have missed. We'd have missed Willie Mays. We'd have missed Henry Aaron. We'd have missed Ernie Banks. We would have missed Bob Gibson, Roberto Clemente. Can you imagine our sport without those stars? So thankfully, integration occurs when it does for those of us who wanted to see all the best players take the field and compete with and against one another. But it does make you wonder what would have happened had the doors opened sooner. In my mind, there is no doubt that the record books would be entirely different. And so it is still an eye-opener, though, when people walk through this museum and they see this 17-year-old kid in this photograph where the Birmingham Black Barons are celebrating having beaten our Kansas City Monarchs to go on to play in the Negro League World Series. Matter of fact, the last Negro League World Series played 1948 against the Homestead Grays. And there's a photograph of this kid, and it's Willie Mays. And people still don't know. There are a lot of baseball fans that don't know that Willie Mays' career began as a 17-year-old center fielder for the Birmingham Black Barons. At that time, his nickname wasn't Say Hey, it was Buck, Young Buck, because he was only 17 years old at that time when he joined the Birmingham Black Barons. And if I'd have told you then that that kid would be recognized as the greatest living major leaguer, and in the eyes of so many, the greatest major leaguer of all time, that he would come out the Negro Leagues, people would have looked at me cross-eyed and said, "Oh man, you got to be kidding me." Willie Mays, Henry Aaron, Ernie Banks, they are just samples of the great talent that called the Negro Leagues home, which is again why I say had the doors open sooner, yeah, the record books will be entirely different. But you see, as baseball fans, we were cheated. Man, we were cheated. We should have seen them all compete with and against each other, and how much better would our sport have been if it wasn't for that backwards mentality that we had societally that said the color of your skin could dictate whether or not you could play this game. We carry a poster in our gift shop that says 420 feet is 420 feet no matter what color your skin is. And I think it beautifully summarizes just how ridiculous segregation really was, particularly as it related to our game, our national pastime.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It was awesome. I could do this all day. I really could. I could just listen. I could just sit here and listen to you go. It was great.
Yeah, and so we're hopeful that Mr. Mays will be there in June. And if he is, you know, no sport is as romanticized as baseball is. It is by far the most romantic sport of them all, which is why the Field of Dreams game in Dyersville caught the imagination of so many. I was at Fenway Park during the All-Star game in Boston when Ted Williams was brought on the field. All the players came, everybody standing, and if that didn't give you goosebumps, then you were probably dead. You know, you weren't there. You didn't have a pulse. We're talking about the exact same kind of emotion that will be evoked if Willie Mays is able to walk on that field one more time, some 75 years since he last stepped out on that field as a member of the Birmingham Black Barons. Can you imagine what that moment in time would feel like? That's what baseball does. It elicits those kinds of emotions, which is why we mark periods in our lives by baseball. I'm a fan of all the major sports. None of them compared to baseball when we talk about making memories. Yeah, that's what's special about this game, and this will be very memorable come June 20th there at Rickwood Field in Birmingham.
Excellent.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Appreciate it.
Man, my pleasure.
Hope that you enjoyed that interview with Bob Kendrick. We have been using little bits and pieces of that throughout Cardinals Insider features on television, cardinals.com/insider, if you want to watch on TV, or new episodes every single Sunday at 11 a.m. Central Time on YouTube. This, however, is the only place that you can get that full, almost 45-minute interview. Bob, Travis, who is the producer of this podcast and also one of our TV guys, he and I were saying we could have sat there all day. Yeah. Could have done it. It would have been easy. Larry, we're going to get out of here shortly, but you were gone last time. The first time we installed our new segment, Stump State.
Yeah. Which you did.
Which we did, and I'm going to try to do it here again now. So here's the question. It is from episode 11 of the Cardinals Insider television show. This week's trivia question is, in what year did the birds on the bat first appear on the Cardinal uniform?
Okay. Well, and of course, people watching this probably don't know that you're doing this because you think that I have great knowledge of Cardinals history and trivia.
You do have great knowledge.
And,
would you like a multiple choice?
So the year that the birds on the bat, I am going to say, I know I could get you within a decade, which is not good enough. I am going to say that it was sometime between 1899 and 1902. So I will pick 1900.
You were close. So that is actually the year they went to the Cardinals' name. The logo doesn't come along until 1922.
Oh, 1922.
Funny enough.
How about that?
They were named Cardinals because of, this is what the newspaper article said back in the day, the lovely shade of cardinal on their socks. They were the St. Louis Perfectos in 1899 when Cy Young was here. And then in 1922, that logo goes on, only comes off in 56, which is now considered a marketing blunder.
Yes.
And it's been there ever since, including that City Connect. That was very intentional, I think, by Bill to leave that on there and make sure that birds on the bat stayed. Yeah, good job, Larry. I hate you. you need to give yourself more credit. You were there. I think a lot of folks would have struggled to get within.
Well, I wasn't
2
there
decades.
when the logo first appeared, although some people think that.
You were not. Larry, this was fun. Thanks for hanging out. Joe should be back with us next month, but we hope that you, again, if the Rickwood game, when you listen or watch this, if it's yet to occur, we hope that you enjoy that. Should be a neat piece of history. The Cardinals participating in a first down there in Birmingham, Alabama. For Larry State, I'm Brett McMillan. We'll check you out on on July 1st for the next edition of the Cardinals Insider Podcast.